A packed courtroom, fluorescent lights humming, the air thick with tension. It's October 1979 in Los Angeles. And every person in that room, judges, jurors, reporters, is about to hear something that would claw its way into their nightmares forever. A prosecutor walks to a table, places a cassette tape into a recorder, and presses play. What spills out isn't a confession. It's not a threat. It's the sound of a 16-year-old girl begging for her life. Her name was Shirley Ledford, a teenager who loved horses and wrote poems about sunsets. But on that tape, you don't hear her laughter, her dreams, or her voice. You hear her screams. Screams so raw, so visceral, that hardened cops choked back tears. A defense attorney later said, "If hell had a soundtrack, this would be it. This isn't just a crime story. This is about the 17-minute tape labeled Exhibit May, a recording so sadistic. It shattered the courtroom's stoicism, redefined the word evil, and left jurors so traumatized. They begged for therapy. Shirley's killers didn't just murder her. They turned her agony into a trophy. And tonight, we're confronting why this tape still haunts the FBI's darkest vaults decades later." Before the headlines, the horror, the courtroom, who is Shirley Ledford? Close your eyes and imagine this: a lanky teenager with windblown hair, riding her horse through the scrubby hills of Sun Valley, California, her jeans dusty, her laughter loud enough to startle birds into flight. At 16, Shirley was the kind of girl who taped photos of foals to her bedroom mirror, who filled spiral notebooks with poems about thunderstorms and first crushes, who told her mom she wanted to be a veterinarian, not for the money, but because animals don't lie. You know, her life wasn't perfect. She argued with her sister over borrowed sweaters. She hated algebra. She saved up waitressing tips to buy a secondhand camera, snapping blurry photos of sunsets she'd later describe in her diary as God's goodnight kiss. But on October 31st, 1979, Shirley did something ordinary. She left home to meet friends for Halloween, put on a striped sweater, jeans, and her favorite scuffed boots, kissed her mom goodbye, and then she vanished. Here's what the newspapers didn't print. Shirley's parents drove for hours that night, screaming her name into the dark. Her little sister slept with Shirley's horse-riding trophy under her pillow, like a talisman. And the cops? They dismissed it at first. Another teen runaway. But Shirley wasn't running. She was fighting. And the truth of what happened to her would drag an entire city into the shadows. For 48 hours, Shirley's family lived in limbo. Her mother paced the floors of their small Sun Valley home, clutching a framed photo of Shirley atop her horse, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure was listening. Her father drove every back road in the San Fernando Valley, stopping strangers to shove a crumpled Polaroid of his daughter into their hands. "Have you seen her? Have you seen my girl?" Police followed dead ends, a rumor she'd run off with a boyfriend, a tip about a hitchhiker near the freeway. But Shirley wasn't a runaway. She was prey. Then, a crack in the darkness. It started with a phone call to the cops. An anonymous man, voice shaky, said two guys he knew had been bragging about something bad. They'd been drinking at a dive bar in Long Beach, slapping the table, laughing like hyenas. One of them pulled out a cassette tape and said, "Listen to this, we got a live one." What the caller heard next made him vomit in the parking lot. A girl's screams, pleas for her mother, and two men's voices, cold and calm, narrating her torture like it was a game. Detectives traced the tape to a rusted blue 1977 GMC van. The license plate was muddy, but a mechanic remembered patching its tires. He joked about the odd tools inside: a sledgehammer, ice picks, vice grips. "You guys construction workers?" The driver just smiled. Something like that. That van belonged to Lawrence Bittaker, a 38-year-old loner with a rap sheet longer than a CVS receipt. Armed robbery, assault, a lifetime of violence. But Bittaker wasn't working alone. His partner was Roy Norris, 30, a convicted rapist who'd met Bittaker in prison. They'd bonded over a shared obsession, inflicting pain. Not for money, not for revenge, just because they could. They called themselves the Toolbox Killers. Not because they used a toolbox, though they did, but because they treated their victims like projects, objects to dismantle. Bittaker, the ringleader, kept meticulous notes, dates, locations, tools used. Norris, the follower, later confessed. He'd say, "Let's try pliers this time," and I'd just nod. It was like a science experiment. But here's where they slipped up. Arrogance. They'd already killed 4 girls that summer, dumped their bodies like trash across Southern California. They thought they were untouchable. So when they kidnapped Shirley on Halloween, they decided to upgrade their routine. Whitaker bought a $29 tape recorder from Radio Shack. "Let's make a souvenir," he said. For 17 minutes, they recorded Shirley's agony, her whimpers, their laughter. They even named the tape May, a sick inside joke. That tape was their trophy, and trophies are meant to be shown off. Norris couldn't resist. He bragged to a cellmate, then played the tape for his parole officer's nephew, who later told the cops. When detectives stormed Whitaker's apartment, they found the tape in a drawer beside handcuffs and a map marked with red X's. But the real horror was in the van. Bloodstains on the floor mat, a claw hammer crusted with hair, and a toolbox. Oh, that toolbox. Wrenches bent from crushing bone, a blowtorch for sealing wounds, pliers with fingernails still wedged in the teeth. Whitaker smirked during his arrest. "You got nothing," he sneered, but when detectives mentioned the tape, his face went pale. Norris cracked faster, offered a deal, life in prison if he testified against Whitaker. "I'll tell you everything," he begged. "Just don't make me listen to that tape again." By November 2nd, the cops knew Shirley was dead, but her body, nowhere. Whitaker refused to say where he'd dumped her. For weeks, volunteers combed canyons. Helicopters scanned Mount Wilson. Her parents held out hope. Maybe she's alive. Maybe they're wrong, until December 8th. A hiker near Angeles Crest Highway spotted something in a ravine. A femur, a jawbone, a striped sweater. It was Shirley. The Toolbox killers thought the tape would immortalize their power. Instead, it became a noose. Because while they were busy playing psychopaths for hire, they forgot one thing. Monsters leave fingerprints. On tools. On tapes. On the memories of everyone who heard Shirley's voice echo through that courtroom. Let me warn you now. What I'm about to describe isn't just violence. It's a blueprint. A step-by-step unraveling of humanity. Because what Lawrence Whitaker and Roy Norris did to Shirley Ledford wasn't a crime of passion. Or rage. Or even hatred. It was practice. Rewind to the summer of 1979. Whitaker and Norris are cruising Southern California in that blue GMC van they called the Murder Mac. They're not hiding. They're hunting. Their first victim, a 16-year-old girl they grab outside a pizza parlor. They beat her with a sledgehammer. Experiment with pliers. When she dies too fast, Whitaker grumbles. "We need better tools." Victim 2, a 13-year-old hitchhiker. They use vice grips to crush her fingers. Norris complains it's too messy. Victim 3, an 18-year-old waitress. They try a blowtorch. Whitaker takes notes. Screams louder if you alternate heat and cold. By Victim 4, they've perfected their routine. Kidnap, torture, record, improve. Then comes October 31st, 1979, Shirley Ledford, 16, accepts a ride from a stranger. She doesn't know the van's sliding door is rigged to lock. Doesn't know the men up front have a checklist. Whitaker pulls onto a deserted mountain road. Norris slaps a cassette into the recorder. And for the next 2 hours, Shirley becomes their masterpiece. The tape, labeled Exhibit May, isn't just audio. It's a dissection of evil. You hear Whitaker's calm, almost bored voice. Try the pliers on her left hand. Let's see how long she lasts. Norris's nervous giggles, the metallic clink of tools being swapped like surgical instruments. And Shirley. Oh, Shirley. She doesn't scream at first. She negotiates. "Please, I'll do anything. I won't tell." Then, as the pliers bite, her voice shatters. "Mom, M.O.M. Help me." Whitaker corrects Norris. "Aim for the joints, more pain. Less noise." At one point, Shirley goes silent. Norris panics. "Is she dead?" "We didn't finish." Whitaker laughs. "Pour salt on the wounds. She'll wake up." And she does. For 17 minutes. The tape rolls. Bones snap. Flesh tears. Shirley's voice dissolves into guttural. Animal sounds, the kind that bypass the brain and stab straight into the spine. When they're done, Whitaker tosses the tools into his toolbox and says, "Cleanup time. Here's what the tape doesn't capture." Shirley's body, dumped like garbage in a ravine. The way her mother's knees buckled when detectives returned her daughter's sweater. The jury member who later wrote, "I still hear her in my sleep. I always will. But here's what you need to understand. This wasn't madness. It was math." Whitaker and Norris spent months optimizing pain, testing tools, Timing screams. Shirley wasn't a person to them, she was data, a benchmark. And if that tape hadn't survived, they'd have kept going. But the tape did survive, because monsters forget one thing. Cruelty has a half-life. Long after the van was scrapped, the tools rusted, and the killer's heart stopped, Shirley's voice remains, filling courtrooms, haunting prisons, echoing through every parent's worst nightmare. And that is why we can't look away, even when we desperately want to. The courtroom was a powder keg. November 20th, 1981, 2 years after Shirley's murder. Lawrence Bittaker sat slouched at the defense table, smirking at the ceiling. Roy Norris, now a witness for the prosecution, fidgeted like a cornered rat. The jury, 12 ordinary people, had already heard about the toolbox, the van, the bodies, but the prosecutors knew it wasn't enough. To prove premeditation, to secure the death penalty, they needed to play the tape. There was just one problem. Could a jury survive listening to it? Lead prosecutor Stephen Kay argued, "If we don't play this, we're letting Bittaker erase Shirley Ledford. Her voice is the evidence." The defense fought back. "This isn't justice, it's torture." Even the judge hesitated. He warned the jury, "What you're about to hear may cause severe emotional distress. You may leave the room if necessary." They didn't leave. Not at first. When the bailiff wheeled the tape recorder into the courtroom, Bittaker stopped smirking. Norris hid his face in his hands. Shirley's mother, Carol, sat in the front row, gripping her husband's arm so tightly her nails drew blood. The prosecutor approached the machine like it was a live grenade. He pressed play. What happened next wasn't just sound, it was an invasion. For 17 minutes, the tape unspooled. Shirley's whimpers, the crack of bones, Bittaker's voice, flat and clinical. Twist the pliers counterclockwise. It lasts longer. One juror, a retired teacher, clamped her hands over her ears. Another bolted for the door. Gagging, a reporter covering the trial wrote. It felt like the room itself was screaming. Halfway through, the judge paused the tape, turned to the jury. "Do you need to stop?" A juror raised his hand, not to quit, to ask a question. "Your Honor, is this real? Or some kind of movie?" The judge didn't answer. He didn't need to. In the gallery, Carol Ledford didn't move, didn't blink. Later, she'd tell the press, "I stayed because Shirley couldn't. Someone had to bear witness." When the tape ended, the courtroom was a graveyard. The defense attorney, pale and shaking, muttered, "No one should ever hear that again." But Shirley's family disagreed. They begged prosecutors to play it. Not for vengeance, not for shock. "You think people know evil?" Carol said. "They don't. They know stories. This tape isn't a story. It's a reckoning." And it worked. The jury took 9 hours to deliberate. They sentenced Bittaker to death. Norris got life. But the trial's true legacy wasn't the verdict, it was the tape. The judge ordered it sealed, labeling it Exhibit May to protect the public. Decades later, FBI agents assigned to Bittaker's case must sign waivers before hearing it. One agent described it as a course in evil and a vaccine against empathy. But here's what they never say out loud. Exhibit May isn't just evidence. It's a border, a line between the world we think we live in, where monsters are myths, where justice is clean, and the reality Shirley endured. A place where evil isn't a shadowy figure in a mask. It's a man in a blue van, laughing as he presses record. So why does the tape still exist? Why not destroy it? The answer's simple, Shirley. Her voice, trapped in those 17 minutes, is the antidote to Bittaker's lie. The lie that monsters are special, that they're clever, that they win. Because when you hear that tape, you realize the truth. Evil isn't brilliant. It's boring. It's small. It's a $29 tape recorder, a rusty toolbox, a coward who needs pliers to feel powerful. Shirley's screams are not a horror story. They're a mirror. And what stares back isn't Bittaker or Norris, it's us. Our willingness to listen, our refusal to let her become a whisper. Because if we can hear Exhibit May and still choose to see her as a girl, not a victim, not evidence, but a person who loved horses and hated algebra, then maybe, just maybe, we can untangle her voice from the monsters who tried to erase her. And that is why the tape remains, not as a tool for the FBI, but as a memorial. For Shirley, on paper, it's simple. Lawrence Bittaker was sentenced to death in 1981. Roy Norris, his accomplice, got life in prison in exchange for testifying. Case closed. But justice isn't math. There's no equation where death penalty minus life sentence equals peace. Whittaker spent 38 years on death row at San Quentin. Not in a cramped cell, but a 6 by 9 foot concrete box. He had a TV, a typewriter, fan mail from true crime obsessives. He gave interviews, grinning like a grandfather at a barbecue. I'd do it all again, he told a documentary crew in 1999. Worth every second. When asked about Shirley, he shrugged. Which one was she? The screamer. He died in 2019, not in the gas chamber, as originally sentenced, but in a hospital bed. Kidney failure. No last words. No remorse. Just silence. Norris, meanwhile, became a ghost. Prisoner #C18201. Hidden in protective custody because even murderers hate child killers. Every few years, he'd petition for parole. In 2010, he claimed he was rehabilitated. Shirley's sister showed up, holding a photo of Shirley's horse riding trophy. You don't get to move on, she told the board. They denied him. In 2020, he tried again. Same result. He's 77 now. Still breathing. Shirley's still not. But here's the uncomfortable truth. No punishment fits the crime. The death penalty? Too quick. Life in prison? Too abstract. Even Exhibit May, locked in an FBI vault in Quantico, labeled for training use only, isn't a solution. Agents here at once to understand the depths of human cruelty. Most quit afterward. One wrote in a memo, "It's not training. It's inoculation. A warning that evil isn't supernatural. It's banal." It buys tape recorders at Radio Shack. So where does that leave us? Shirley's parents died in the 2000s. Their obituaries forever shadowed by the words "survived by." Her sister keeps a voicemail from their mom, saved for 20 years. They denied Norris again. He'll never get out. She plays it when the nightmares come. Whittaker's blue van was crushed into scrap. His toolbox? Rusted, but intact. The FBI keeps it as evidence, though no one touches it. The pliers still have Shirley's DNA in the teeth. And the tape, Exhibit May, sits in a climate-controlled vault. Digital copies exist, but they're encrypted, access logs stricter than nuclear codes. In 2019, a Reddit thread claimed to have leaked it. Turned out to be a hoax. The FBI issued a statement. No version will ever be released. Some things need to stay buried. But here's the problem with burying monsters. They leave roots. Whittaker's face still pops up in true crime forums. Memes. YouTube thumbnails with clickbait titles. The worst serial killer you've never heard of. Norris's parole hearings make local news. Recycled every decade like a bad Halloween costume. And Shirley? She's a footnote. A name in a transcript. A scream on a tape. That's the real crime. Not the sentencing, but the erasure. The way we turn victims into spectacles. Then spectacles into trivia. The way we debate justice while the Ledford's wounds still bleed. So let's end with facts. Not platitudes. Lawrence Whittaker never apologized. Never flinched. Died warm in a bed. Roy Norris still breathes. Still fights. Still doesn't know Shirley's middle name. Exhibit May will outlive us all. A fossil of cruelty. A girl's voice trapped in amber. Justice? Maybe it doesn't exist. Maybe it's just a word we use to pretend the scales balance. But Shirley's story isn't about balance. It's about weight. The weight of a tape recorder. The weight of a jury's tears. The weight of a sister's grief. Heavy enough to crush parole boards into dust. And the weight of a question we're too scared to ask. If we can't give Shirley justice, what can we give her instead? Maybe this. Remember her horse's name. Dusty. Remember her favorite poem, scribbled in a diary. The sun doesn't set here. It runs away. Remember that she was 16. Not a victim. Not evidence. A girl. And the tape. Let it rot. Let it fade. Let it die with the monsters who made it. But Shirley stays. Let's be clear, this isn't a story about monsters. It's about a girl who still exists. In the margins of a diary, in the memories of a horse named Dusty, in the echo of a scream trapped on a cassette tape. Shirley Ledford's story matters not because it's rare, but because it's not. Evil isn't some mythic beast hiding under the bed. It's a man in a van offering a ride. It's a laugh between friends as they stock a toolbox. It's the click of a recorder bought on sale. We tell these stories not to sensationalize pain, but to dismantle the lie that evil is extraordinary. It isn't. It's ordinary. It's lazy. It's weak. And that's what terrifies us. Because if monsters are just people, then where does that leave us? Shirley's mother, Carol gave an interview years after the trial. A reporter asked her, "Why keep fighting? Why not try to forget?" She stared straight into the camera and said, "Forgetting is what they want. The men who hurt her? They wanted her to disappear, to be a joke they told in bars. But every time we say her name, every time we remember, we win." That's the courage here. Not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet refusal to look away. It's in the prosecutor who played that tape, knowing it would haunt him forever. In the jurors who stayed in that courtroom, even as their hands shook. In Shirley's sister, who still whispers goodnight to an old horse-riding trophy. Exhibit May isn't just evidence. It's a choice to listen to the worst of humanity so we can hear the best of it. 2. The mother who wouldn't let her daughter become a punchline. The strangers who still leave flowers near Angeles Crest Highway. The FBI agents who guard that tape not as a relic of horror, but as a vow. We will not let this happen in the dark again. So why does Shirley matter? Because she's not a cautionary tale. She's a mirror. When we reduce her to a scream on a tape, we become the courtroom that hesitated to press play. But when we see her, really see her, as a girl who loved sunsets and hated math homework, who wrote bad poetry and dreamed of healing animals, we become the ones who press stop. Stop the glorification of killers. Stop the clickbait. Stop the erasure. True crime isn't about the monster. It's about the light they tried to snuff out. Shirley's light still burns, in the way her story forces us to ask, what will I do? Look away or listen? We have to listen, not to the tape, to her.